An unearthly hello to my fellow horror enthusiasts. Welcome to the Writers of Horror podcast. The Writers of Horror is a community for horror creatives, a place to connect with other horror enthusiasts and to elevate your horror writing. I'm Daniel Willcocks. I'll be your host for this episode, and today I am thrilled to be joined in the virtual studio by none other than the insanely talented Eric Larocca. Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here and just chat with you. I think this is going to be great.
Yes, I have a lot of really, really fun questions to ask you. But first, we'll tell people a bit about yourself. So, Eric Larocca is the Bram Stoker Award nominated and Splatterpunk Award winning author of several works of horror and dark fiction, including the viral sensation Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. A lover of luxury fashion and an admirer of European musical theatre, Eric can often be found roaming the streets of his home city, Boston, Massachusetts, for inspiration. And so I kind of want to jump a little bit away from that bio, and because I was doing a little bit of research from you, I was stalking obviously before we came to this conversation, and I picked up, or my ears pricked up on a little tidbit of information that you are a big fan of monsters in particular when it comes to horror. Is this accurate? And what are your favorite go-to monsters that you like to write or read about?
Yeah, no, I mean, I grew up on like the classic Universal monster movies. So like my first intro to horror was The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Mm.
My mom showed me that movie when I was like 8 or 9, and that just like left such an impression on me. Um, I find that in terms of like my own writing, when I'm, crafting a piece or, brainstorming what I want to write about, I'm definitely interested in monsters, but I'm more interested in like human monsters and like how like what's the worst possible thing a human can do to another human being. That to me is just like really interesting. And I definitely grew up on that diet of like classic Universal monster movies, but then my taste sort of shifted and I started watching like a lot of um like transgressive South Korean films like Old Boy and I Saw the Devil, and then like the new French Extremity like Martyrs and Inside. And those films like left also such a huge impression on me. So I find it more unsettling when we're analyzing, what's the worst humanity can do to itself.
Mm.
How do we like hurt ourselves, our own kind?
Yeah.
That to me is just like really, really fascinating. So in terms of like what monsters I kind of gravitate to now, I definitely would say like human monsters.
Mm.
Just like I read like a ton of like Jack Ketchum and like Poppy Z. Bright, like Exquisite Corpse, like books like that are so much more unsettling than traditional like vampire werewolf, like those pieces are great. I definitely have like a lot of love for them, but for me like the most exciting and the most like visceral and just uncomfortable monsters are just human beings. I
Mm.
find like humanity, I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to like regarding humanity and just like how awful we are to one another.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, yeah. So I find myself really leaning into that more than anything.
Mhm.
I have a book coming out in March from Titan called The Trees Grew Because I Bled There. And that's like a collection of short fiction. And that entire collection, it's all just human beings doing awful things to one another and like,
Mm.
the relationships we forge with one another and how those relationships rot and decay and how we're eventually just going to rot and decay as well. So that's kind of what I'm inspired by now, just like with monsters, but I still love the classics like Dracula and Frankenstein.
Yeah, we are very similar there because I include monsters in my fiction, but it's often just to illustrate the depravities that humans go to in the situations when they're kind of stuck in the dark corners, and
Totally.
that's where the focus is. And it's almost like the monsters are the tool that gets you there. But I find it very very fascinating. I don't know if you've experienced this of there seems to be a trend at the minute of lots of people who watch like serial killer and true crime things, and they'll listen to you when you say I write horror, and they're like, oh, I'd never read horror, but then they're actually watching what I would argue is worse horror on the TV of things that have actually happened in these sort of brutal, just disgusting ways. Have you ever sort of encountered
Oh,
that with some of the people around you?
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I find it really difficult to watch those true crime specials because they're actual things that have happened. I mean, the playground that we're kind of playing in as horror authors, it's all make believe. I mean, obviously it's possible for these things to happen to other people, but the characters and the events and the ways in which the story is being told, like it's all made up. Like it's from the mind of an author. But when you kind of delve into the more like based on a true event, like based on whatever case you're talking about, whatever like murder or tragedy that happened, I get a little even more uncomfortable with stuff like that just because I know like it's real and it actually happened. That's not to say I won't watch that sort of
Mhm.
material, but I definitely have to be like in the right headspace for that.
Yeah, I find it very confusing speaking to people about that. And I just even off of just that first intro, I've got a lot of questions to springboard from. But just to set context for the people who might be a bit more unfamiliar to you, are you happy to tell everyone a little bit about your writing journey and how you kind of got to where you are today?
Yeah, no, of course. So I mean, I grew up in a very small, isolated town in Connecticut, and that's kind of where I learned to write, read, where I discovered how much I love horror. Um, and from there, I, went to college and studied fiction, studied playwriting. Pretty much a lot of my early work was primarily like work for the theater. So I did a lot of like stage plays. And then, just eventually graduated to fiction and short story writing. And from there, I just started working with small presses like Weird Punk Books. And that's where Weird Punk is the press that published my like kind of debut novella called Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. And that went viral. And it was just a really fascinating journey to be on, definitely like a roller coaster ride with something like that. And now I publish with Titan Books, and I have a lot of material coming out from them in the pipeline over the next couple years. Like I was saying, I have The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, which is coming out in March, on March 7th, which is a re-release of a short fiction collection I had published back in 2021. But it's been out of print for obviously like 2 years now, or a year and a half. So folks can, now read those short stories. But yeah, I primarily work in like horror, dark fiction. Like I said, I'm really fascinated by just humanity and the awful things we do to one another, and
Mm.
that's kind of where my fiction resides, I think. And especially, my work concentrates a lot on like openly queer characters, or maybe not openly queer characters, just queer characters in general. The LGBTQ community. I like to explore like all characters in my community. So that's kind of a broad overview of me.
Mm.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and from what I can understand, so you came into my circle um probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Obviously, the name Eric Larocca was going mad with Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, the kind of viral cover sensation that went everywhere. It was one of those things of like, it wasn't because there's often books that circulate around the bookstagram communities and kind of really sort of pop up now and then, but they don't always grab me. But there was really something about like the cover, and there was something particular about the titling of your books which really really grabbed me, which is something I want to go into. But before I kind of like ask those questions, how do you cultivate a viral sensation when it comes to publishing your book? I know this is a very difficult question to answer.
It's a great question because I wish I had the answer. Because if I had the answer, every book I published would go viral. Um, I get asked that question a lot, and I've really done a lot of reflecting on it. And I think what happened with Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke is that it was just like a perfect storm of an opportunity for a book to go viral.
Mm-hmm.
You had like the insane cover art by Kim Jacobson, which is so striking, so visually arresting. That's obviously going to attract people. You had a really snappy, catchy title. Things have gotten worse since we last spoke. Who doesn't want to pick up that book? Like
Oh,
that,
it's a great title.
it's a phenomenal title, if I may say so. Like
Yeah.
that's a great title and it's going to attract people. And you had, a really unconventional way of telling a story, like in chat rooms and email threads. And, it really all, excuse me, it all like contributed to the success of the book. I don't necessarily think you can replicate that easily with every book. Like each book is going to have the life that it takes. Some books come out and they do fairly well and then they kind of fall away. Some books come out and there's really no response and then maybe a few years later there's a massive response and people are really interested and they're really talking about it. It really depends, I feel like, on the book and just the book in general. Like it really all comes back to the book and the writing and how it's marketed. um that being said, you can't buy that level of going viral. You can't like purchase that somewhere. It really has to be like an organic situation. And like I said, like if I knew the answer to why exactly that book went viral, I like all of my books would have the same number of reviews on Goodreads, would have the same number of copies sold. Um, you know, I I independently released a novella called You've Lost a Lot of Blood, which came out like March 2022. And basically what I was trying to do with that was, first of all, I was trying to just give my readers just like a gift to hold them over until more of my material was able to come out, because at that time, a lot of my material was pulled away and out of print and was coming back out through Titan, but it was going to be a while. So I thought, oh, I'll just put this book out. And I used Kim Jacobson again for cover art. Kim did the cover art for Things Have Gotten Worse. And it was a fairly successful book for a self-published book. I mean, we've sold like over 20,000 copies. That's great.
Fantastic story as
But
well.
thank you, thank
Yeah.
you. But it's not that level of viral
Mm-hmm.
that Things Have Gotten Worse became. And I think also because I think perhaps Things Have Gotten Worse went so viral because there were so many different opinions afterward. There were so many conversations. You had a really polarizing book with Things Have Gotten Worse, because you have people that like absolutely love it, and then you have people that absolutely despise it because of XYZ, whatever reasons. So stuff like that, I feel like controversy maybe is a reason for going viral.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but obviously, I don't encourage writers to just write stuff that is they think is controversial. If you sit down and you think, well, what can I write that's gonna, piss people off or make people upset? Like, I feel like you might be going into it for the wrong reasons. I think at the end of the day, we should just sit down and write compelling stories that excite us and that, move us and uh, just speak to us in some way. Like there has to be heart behind it. And there was heart behind the reason I wrote Things Have Gotten Worse. But as far as like bottling that success and mimicking it for every book, it would be great if we could do that. But it's so fleeting and it's so rare to capture that.
Mm-hmm.
So just to go back to answer your question, I wish I had like a definitive answer. I feel like I picked up on small reasons why it went off the way it did, but I don't have that one, concrete definition as to why it took off the way it did,
Yeah. And that was the only reason I invited you on. No, I'm only joking. But I mean, everything you said there makes sense. Like, because you said it kind of at the beginning was like, you put it in the right places in the right ways that you could and did everything possible to make that spark light into a fire. And that's all you can do when it comes to trying to promote work and, trying to hit that critical mass. And, like you say, the cover was incredible. The title is amazing. Reading the book, the prose, the whole story is fantastic. So you've got all these ingredients of, you know, what makes a good book, and really that's the only part that you can control. And then, you know, you pop that out there, and if it shoots, it shoots. And, you know, obviously for you in this case it did. What did it feel like when it got to the point that you started really seeing those numbers come in and you started to see it getting shared everywhere? What was that kind of reaction for you?
Oh, I mean, at first it was incredible. Like I was floating everywhere I went. I was just walking on clouds. Like I felt so validated. I felt so appreciated. I felt like my work had finally reached what I had wanted it to. I wanted to, you know, write something that reached a lot of people, that kind of went outside the horror genre and touched other people. Um, it was an incredible experience. And you know, I think having such a viral success early on, almost it's kind of difficult, because every other release since then, like, it's been phenomenal. Like, other releases have been great, but it's so hard to live up to that initial success. You know what I mean? And I definitely have moments where I'm like, oh, I hope that that's not my one and only. Like, I hope that, like, I'll, you know, write more and release other, you know, books that will be just as well received and, you know, as highlighted in horror and beyond. Um, but it's great on one hand, and it's also uh difficult to process on the other hand, because it's so much attention, it's so much criticism coming at you, you know, in every direction. I've found that I kind of need to, like, turn off sometimes and just, like, protect my creative being, myself, because if I allow too much negativity and too much criticism to, like, bombard me, it dilutes whatever project I'm working on right now. And then, like, my art kind of suffers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've hopefully I think I could work a little bit harder on it and develop, like, an even better balance. But I'm really trying to really be mindful of just, like, protecting my art and my creativity, and really trying to not, like, kind of go into, like, the Goodreads and the YouTube comments and read too much, because at the end of the day, those reviews, they're not for me. They're for other readers who are going to pick up that book. The book has already been published. At this point, like, I don't need to workshop it with anybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like a book. When you write a book, you have an editor, you work with the editor, you go back and forth, pitch different ideas, develop certain characters. Like, it's a whole process. But then when the book comes out, it's really no longer a conversation between author and reader. It's more of a conversation between the readers. So I try as much as possible to kind of stay out of that conversation, unless I'm tagged in, like, a review. And, you know, then I'll just say thank you. Like, I really appreciate it. But it's definitely been a huge learning experience for me, just how to navigate the industry, how to be a better writer, how to, you know, just like I said, like, navigate and just kind of operate in this horror sphere that we're all in. But it's been so rewarding in so many other ways, because I've met so many awesome people from that book, you know.
Yeah, I love that idea that the reviews are, you know, readers on readers, because I know a lot of authors that do get stuck in the rabbit hole of going down and looking at the reviews. And obviously, like, when you're focusing on the negative ones, because that's what the human brain's going to do, it's going to go to the negative and go, like, I've not done well enough, as opposed
Yeah,
to
it's what I
sticking with the
do,
good
you
ones. Yeah,
know.
it's just
Yeah.
a natural process of what it happens. And, like, I like that idea of sort of shutting it off and just going, like, no, that's what it is. Like, the book, because again, I guess sort of it comes back to almost this theme of control and what we can do as authors to keep producing, keep making stuff. And you mentioned on another podcast that that's one of the lessons that you've learned, is this idea that all you can do is keep writing forward, all you can do is just keep creating art and moving forward. How has your writing process sort of changed from the early days of you beginning into sort of horror prose fiction, and has it changed much in sort of the last few years with all of this success?
Yeah, it's changed like quite a bit. I mean, I was so impulsive and so reckless when I was starting out. Like I wouldn't outline, I would just sort of start writing, and I would back myself into corners without outlining, you know. It made it more difficult for me because I've learned after all of this that I'm the type of writer that needs to outline first. I need to make notes. I need to really kind of just immerse myself in this world I'm going to create, these characters that I'm going to be around for a while. I can't kind of just go into it cold and just expect that everything's going to work out. So a lot of my work, like in college and like grad school, I didn't really outline, but it wasn't until really grad school that I learned about myself and how, oh, like I do need to outline. Like that's like the best thing for me to do is to outline and really kind of just get in there and make sure that the story works. Because if you're not, for me at least, if you're outlining and there's a problem in the outline, that problem is still going to be there when you're writing the actual piece. So it's really important to kind of get all those issues resolved before you start writing. At least for me, that's what works best for me. And you know, I'm very lucky that I've got a really phenomenal agent that I can kind of send you know, project proposals to, and she'll look at them and she'll tell me, oh well, this really isn't working for me, and then we'll kind of discuss why. But you know, writers, you know, it's so important to build that community. Like even if I was still, you know, without an agent, I would try to maybe find like a writers group or some sort of like community. Like that's why grad school was so fun for me, because it was just like a group of like-minded individuals. We were all like creating stuff. It was, we all like respected each other. We all like wanted the best for each other. That was just those were 2 years of my life that I do not regret 1 second. I had the best time ever. And but just I think like all writers need some sort of community to really flourish and excel. I think when writing is obviously such a solitary activity, it's so
Mhm.
isolating. You really need people in your corner, you know, that you can text when you get that bad review, so that you don't put it on Twitter, so that you don't put it on Facebook and talk about it. Just talk about it to your friends, you know,
Mhm.
and keep it between them. Like that's really like those are the big things I've learned just about myself since things have gotten worse.
Yeah, I think community is a very very big one, because a lot of people tend to avoid it because obviously we can't write in a community. Well, we can, the writing groups, but do you know what I mean? Like when it comes to you and your work, it's you one on one alone, and there's no one else that can help with that. But
Totally.
this idea of, you know, supporting each other and at least having that person to reach out to, and just understand what it is that you're going through at that point, because most of the time our family, our friends aren't creatively inclined in the ways that we are. They're not chasing the same sort of dreams, and so that language to be able to speak to someone else and go like, my character won't listen, and to have someone go, oh, that sucks, like I get that, like, is huge.
Totally.
How was that journey of building your community gone? Because I can imagine that, you know, as you know, your success has sort of risen each stage, there's been I guess gaps between, you know, certain people in that community and then finding new people, and that is a bit of a challenge. Has that been the case for you?
Well, I was when I was like first starting out, before things have gotten worse, I've always been kind of shy with like reaching out to people because I'm always afraid that I'm like bothering them, or you know, like just like a burden in some way. But it really wasn't. But I did make friends with some folks in the horror community before things have gotten worse, and they've been like phenomenal. They've been great. You know, I'm still in touch with them, and I feel like, you know, we'll stay connected for the rest of the time that I'm writing and publishing. But because of things have gotten worse, I've definitely been in a great position to meet like authors that I have idolized like my whole life. And I'm it's crazy, but like I'm able to like connect with them in a way that I wasn't able to connect with them before. And I'm definitely like in a great circle of people, and I feel really valued, and I feel, and that's really like that's what it comes down to, is that you're with people who obviously get what you're going through, who you can text when you get like a bad review in like one of the trades. Like that is like you can't buy that.
Yeah.
So it's definitely altered over the time that I've been like writing. But I feel very fortunate that I'm able to be around such just incredible like-minded folks. And there's a ton of really exceptional horror authors in New England. So I'm kind of like in a great place just in general.
Horror
Um,
Central.
yeah, it's like horror central, to be honest.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, it's been great. It's been really, really great.
Nice. Let's talk titles, because this fascinates me, because I'm trying to track this down. So titles from Eric Larocca. Things have gotten worse since we last spoke. You've lost a lot of blood. We can never leave this place. They were here before us. Everything the darkness eats. The trees grew because I bled there. Like there's something very just poetic and unique and different in each of those titles, and it's so refreshing to see almost like a statement in the title itself. And now, is that something that you came across yourself? Because I've seen a lot of other authors start to do this style of titling. Is that something
Yeah.
that you found you were influenced by, or is that something that you think that in some way you might have influenced?
Oh, I mean, I don't know if I've influenced people. I mean, maybe. But I kind of vibed with this kind of title with like the old Giallo movies, like anything by like Argento or Bava. There's one called Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key.
Oh wow.
Yeah, there are tons of really great Giallo titles from like the 70s and 80s, like What Have You Done to Solange and Who Saw Her Die. Um, yeah, just like really just striking, and titles that make you stop and you're like, I need to watch that,
Mm-hmm.
so I was really influenced by those titles, just Giallo titles. And for those of you who are listening and don't know, like Giallo films are like basically gory murder mysteries that were primarily produced and released like in Italy or France, like very European, in like the 1970s, 1980s. And Dario Argento is a pioneer of that subgenre. But yeah, no, I love a good title. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing that's more important to me than crafting a really compelling title. So I definitely feel like I'm the type of writer that I really can't start working on a piece until I know what the title's going to be. It might change while I'm writing, but I need that foundation. I need that stability to kind of lean on in the beginning to know what I'm creating, to name it,
Yeah.
that's just really important to me starting out from the gate.
Yeah, and they're certainly memorable. I mean, it kind of for me throws back a little bit to I don't know how much of a Fall Out Boy fan you might be, but Fall Out Boy, their titles on their songs are incredible. Although the only difference is it's very difficult to know which song links to which title because they don't really make sense. But in your
Gotcha.
case, it seems to like speak to actually what the story is, which is very, very helpful for a reader.
Right.
Um, let's talk about some of your influences, because I know that people like you mentioned, Jack Ketchum. I know that Clive Barker's a big influence of yours. What is it about their work particularly that speaks to you, and how do you incorporate some of the stuff that you do into your own writing?
Well, I mean, Clive Barker is probably the biggest influence for me. I read the Books of Blood, I think like high school or college, like undergrad. And prior to that, I really didn't see queerness in horror. I didn't see LGBT characters operating in horror. I saw coded figures, but not really explicitly stated queer characters. And it really wasn't until I read In the Hills of the Cities by Clive Barker that, I saw a gay couple in horror fiction. And that was just such a seminal moment for me and really kind of reshaped my relationship with the genre. Because prior to that, I thought to myself, well, I don't know if I really belong in horror. I don't know if my stories are valid in horror. The stuff that I was writing was very like Stephen King leaning esque, like it
Yep.
just very, not, it didn't really have like, not that Stephen King doesn't have like flair and personality with his writing, but my own writing was very like bland and just had no personality, um and didn't have like a really solid identity. But it really wasn't until I read Clive Barker that I said to myself, oh, like I can be queer and write in this genre and I belong. So Clive Barker's been a huge influence, not only in just like his queerness, but also the fact that he writes such depravity and such brutality with this like lyrical prose.
Mm-hmm.
So like he marries these two extremes, this like just beauty with absolute degeneracy. Like that is a really interesting juxtaposition to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to kind of replicate that in my own fiction. I know a lot of readers have said that my writing is Barker-esque with like the beautiful, like sumptuous descriptions, but then kind of veering off into gore and splatter.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a huge Clive Barker fan. Also a big fan of Poppy Z. Bright, like Exquisite Corpse and Are You Loathsome Tonight, Drawing Blood. Also a huge fan of Kathy Koja, like Skin. I'm just really invested in like the 80s and 90s like splatterpunk movement.
Mm.
That to me was just, I feel like the pinnacle of horror fiction
Yeah.
when people were really just audacious and just did whatever they wanted. So I feel like those three, and then also Michael McDowell. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
The name, but I've not read any of his stuff yet.
yeah, he's another phenomenal uh, gay horror author. He passed away unfortunately, but his books are exceptional, like The Elementals and Blackwater. So yeah, no, I feel like I've studied quite a bit of just like the horror genre in general, and I've just immediately gravitated toward that like extreme uh kind of transgressive movement in like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, and it is nice seeing the Horror Writers Association. Like something I've noticed from where I've been sitting and watching all the action taking place is there is just a lot of focus on inclusivity and providing the platform for a lot of people to share their work these days. And it is
Totally.
just from my side of things, as I say, like even I'm seeing like a lot of like the Latinx stuff and a lot of like the Black writers and the queer writers, and I think it's awesome to see more of that going around in the circle. And not just that, but for it to just feel much more normal than like the outside what's the word, to see it much more just in present, just populated throughout all of what is being pushed by the Horror Writers Association. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, totally. I mean, I'm a member of the HWA and I feel like they've made exceptional strides in the past few years, even
Yes.
just with more inclusivity and just making sure that all of the voices are at the table. So I'm really pleased and I'm glad that, you picked up on that as well. I know like a lot of people are really proud to be HWA members and I'm definitely one of them.
Yeah. With your upcoming books, obviously you've mentioned that you've got the Trees group because I bled there coming out in March from Titan. You've got Everything the Darkness Eats coming in July, I believe. What is it that you try to, and for want of a better word, achieve with your writing these days compared to perhaps where you were a year or two ago?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I feel like now I have more of a responsibility and I have like a little bit of a bigger platform. So I feel that responsibility when I write. I try not to be too mindful of the audience while I'm writing. Um, but I know that my writing will reach people. Fingers crossed, obviously. Um, but I think when I'm writing now, I can't write something if it's not in my heart. And I know, like, prior to, like I was saying, like when I was prior to reading Clive Barker, the stuff that I was writing was so bland and just like unimaginative and really just like carbon copies of other things that I was reading or watching at the time. It didn't have me in it, you know? And anything I write now, if I'm not connecting with it, if I'm not fully in love with it, I just stop writing and I'll write something else because life's too short to
Mhm.
write stuff that you don't believe in or that you think, oh, maybe this will sell. If I'm not behind it, if I can't stand in front of a room of people and say, this is my art, do with it what you will. If I don't have the confidence to do that, then I shouldn't write the book. I shouldn't write that story. So for me, it's really easy now because I have like a really good just internal detector of what is meaningful to me and what resonates with me.
Mm.
So just to answer your question, I mean, I think for me, like what works best now is just know, like, am I in this? Like, am I somewhere in these pages?
Mm.
And if not, then just move on.
Yeah, I can imagine that's very, very difficult to do because I know that my platform is probably not near yours at this point. But the minute you started getting readers, I definitely feel that pressure of like, oh, now I have to write something that they like, as opposed to thinking, I write the stories that I like, which is why they liked my stories because they liked
Mhm.
what was me. And that kind of mindset shift is really, really difficult to rein in and to keep control of. Have you got any sort of
And they'll be,
specific tips on?
well, I mean, I was gonna say, like, they'll be able to tell, like, your
Yes.
readers will be able to tell when you're not being authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And everything I've put out, like I stand behind 100%. There's never been a moment where I'm like, oh, like I don't know about that. Like I I feel like, as far as like tips on how to kind of, you mean like tips on how to figure out like if you're in it or like tips on just forgetting
Yeah, I
about the
guess it's sort of
audience?
yeah, detecting those moments because sometimes it's very easy just to get into the trenches and be writing. And I know that I've had it before. I've been halfway through the story and it's taken a while to go like, this just isn't for me because there's also this voice in the back of my head going, just finish it.
Yeah, and that's the problem is that there is a part of all of us that will be that like inner saboteur
Mm.
and will try to like get us off the rails and be like, this isn't good. People are gonna hate this. This is shit. But it's a fine line between this is bad and this just doesn't have me in it.
Mm.
And I feel like on some level, like if you're in tune with yourself and you really know who you are, um, you'll be able to tell. A lot of this is just like doing the self work to kind of figure this out, and really like know who you are.
Mm.
I mean, there were so many years that I spent not wanting to be queer, not wanting to be who I was, and now I'm the type of person where it's like what you see is what you get. I am who I am. I don't know what else to tell you. Like if you don't like it, that's your problem. It's not my
Uh-huh.
problem. So it's definitely difficult, but if you spend the time to do that work on yourself and really be reflective and decide like what kind of story do you want to tell, you'll be able to tell in maybe a couple pages, like if this book needs to be told by you.
Yep. I'll discard a book when I when I come for this interview now. This is going to be quite a big question, but what makes good horror?
Oh, feel like the characters.
Mm.
I feel like the characters really make good horror when you really care about them, when you really, or, when you're at least like invested in what's happening to them. That I feel like makes really good horror because when the horrible stuff happens, like I said, you're invested.
Mhm.
You don't want them to be like dismembered. You don't want them to be like haunted or whatever. Um, I feel like, characters are the most probably the most important part of horror, and crafting compelling characters. It can be like rather difficult. Um, but if you spend the time to really work with your characters and develop them accurately, I feel like it makes for us just such a stronger book. Um, I can have difficulty sometimes crafting characters. I'm more of a plot person, I've learned. I'm more of somebody who kind of relies on plot and less on characters. So that's like my Achilles heel, is just crafting really like palpable characters. I just did an edit on a book that's coming out in like 2025, and pretty much all of the work I had to do on it was character work.
Mm.
The plot worked fine. The plot was great, my editor said, but there were moments that I lapsed with the character work, and there were moments that I missed out on to really strengthen character dynamics, character arcs. Um, so, I mean, you learn about that from working with editors. I wouldn't have really known that if I didn't have, a great team around me, or like a community. It goes back to
Mhm.
that idea of like a community. You need people who are in your corner, who are on your side, who want the best for you, and can like gently tell you, like, this isn't working and this is why,
Mhm.
constructive criticism. But yeah, just to get back to your question, I feel like with good horror, it really relies heavily on characters.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say that that's one of the things that I love is that, the end product, you don't see all of the nitty gritty of obviously what goes into the writing process. So, like, there's this impression for new authors specifically that, you write a draft, maybe two drafts, and then you've got this perfectly polished books. Because I could say from the works I've read of yours, the characters, there's something about the realism in the characters and the situations. Obviously, they're quite dire situations. In particular, you've lost a lot of blood and things have gotten worse since we last spoke. There's something that's fundamentally like it's dark, but it's like so real. Like you can imagine those moments, you can feel that because they're true people. And as you say, like with character being something that you struggle with, you don't see that in the finished product, but obviously a lot of that goes into the edit and the creation process.
Totally, totally. I mean, it I owe so much to my editors with their notes and their guidance. And that's really what I want to stress to writers, like younger writers who are kind of just breaking into the business, is it's so important to just have as many eyes on your work as possible before it goes to print, because once it's in print, it's there forever.
Mhm. And ever, you cannot remove it from the internet once it's out there.
Right, exactly.
Who are a few underrated or underappreciated authors that people should know more about?
Ooh, definitely David Demchuk is a phenomenal Canadian horror author. He's openly gay and writes really phenomenal queer horror fiction. He wrote his debut novel was called The Bone Mother, which was originally published by Chizine, and then once they folded, it's now just like a self-published piece that he released. But it's just a phenomenal book. And also Red X, which is another great book that came out through Strange Light, I think, in like 2019, 2020. And just David deserves like all the praise, all the recognition, and I definitely feel like more people need to be aware of his work. There's also Joe Koch, who writes like very transgressive, queer, hallucinatory body horror, just very surreal. He writes just really just incredibly lyrical prose. You almost kind of like the words, they're just like you want to just devour the books. They're just so sumptuous and just so beautifully written. Um, so I would say David Demchuk and Joe Koch are like two authors that I would recommend to readers and have them discover more of, because they definitely deserve like all the recognition for sure.
I always love it when people say that people I've never heard of. It's always very
Yeah,
useful
no,
for me. It's a very selfish question.
no, it's great. I mean, I feel like there are so many authors operating in horror now. I mean, we really are in such a boom, so it's hard to keep up with everybody. But I highly recommend both of those works.
Nice. Well, I have two more questions. The first one might be a tricky one for you. So, the world is on fire, and there is one theater left in the world, and you have 4 hours remaining of your life on this earth, and you have the chance to watch one more show. What show are you watching?
Oh, you mean like a movie or a play
Like a
or?
play, a musical, a theater show, whatever it is you want to put on there.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, you don't have to like assemble the cast. Just imagine they're all ready to go.
I'm gonna go with this musical that I absolutely love, and it's from it premiered like in Vienna in like the early 90s. It's based on the life of Empress Elizabeth of Austria, and the musical is called Elizabeth. And it's just like really dark and just beautiful music. It's sung through completely like Les Miserables or like um Cats or Phantom, like any of the Andrew Lloyd Webber shows. But it's kind of like almost like a fantasy musical drama where the Empress Elizabeth, it chronicles her life, but also kind of explores her relationship with Death, who is an actual character in the play. And he kind of comes in and out of her life while she's going through the turmoil and suffering that she went through in her life. It's just a really like beautiful show, and it's just music that I listen to constantly just because it's so beautiful.
Love that. I'll have to check that out. And I will put links to your recommended authors and also that show into the show notes, as well as part of my final question. Now that we come to the end of the interview, where can everyone find out all about yourself and all that you've got going on?
Yeah, so they can go to my website, which is just ericlarocca.com. I'm really active on Twitter and Instagram. My username is at Hysteric Teeth. And I'm also on Facebook. I'm really active on social media, so I don't have like a mailing list or anything yet, like an email list. I should probably set something like that up. But for now, like just, if you want to learn more, like definitely follow me and you'll stay up to date on everything.
And I kind of lied out of that. How so? One final question. Hysteric teeth. What's the meaning behind that? I'm very, very curious.
Yeah, well, I mean, teeth in general like terrify me. Like for some reason, like I'm just like very unnerved by teeth. But I thought it was just a funny like title. Like I was thinking of using it at one point for a title and didn't really go anywhere with it. I also like the fact that my name is in it. Hysteric, like
Yeah.
ERIC is in hysteric. Um, so yeah, it's just something weird I just came up with, and um I just thought like, oh, that's a great, like it's not a good title for a book, but maybe it's a great username for
Mm-hmm.
me.
No, I think it's perfect. It's spot on, and obviously it's quite memorable as well. So
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
no worries. Well, that brings us to the end of this interview. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. And everyone who's been listening to this podcast, remember we have many, many other episodes. Go over to writersofhorror.org to find out all about ourselves and all that we've got going on. One final time from myself and from Eric. Catch you later.